It's funny, the things you remember. Not the impact itself, not the screech of metal or the shattering glass. That's just noise. A blank space where coherent thought used to be. No, what sticks with me, what really haunts the quiet moments, is the smell. Antiseptic. That cloying, sharp scent that clings to everything in a hospital. It became the perfume of my new reality. 3 years ago, a Tuesday, ironically sunny, my world didn't just change, it imploded. One moment, I was Martha. Henderson-in-law, PTA mom, weekend gardener, mildly frustrated wife navigating the predictable currents of suburban life. The next, I was this. Gestures down at her lap, covered by a blanket. A torso learning to navigate the world from a seated position. The car accident didn't just take my legs. It felt like it scooped out the core of who I was, leaving this hollowed-out shell. Independence? Gone. Privacy? A luxury I could no longer afford. My marriage? Well, that crumbled under the weight of it all faster than the car wrapped around that telephone pole. He couldn't handle the new me, but amidst the wreckage, something unexpected happened. Something complicated. My son-in-law, Phillip. He was 17 then, all lanky limbs and simmering teenage angst. Suddenly, he wasn't just my son-in-law, he became my lifeline. My hands, my feet, my constant shadow. And that closeness, born from absolute necessity, started to shift. It warped into something I still struggle to define, something that terrifies and confuses me even now. We're going to get into that, the raw, uncomfortable truth of it. But first, please like this video and subscribe if you enjoy these stories. It helps a lot. Coming home from the hospital was like entering a familiar house owned by a stranger. Everything looked the same. The worn armchair Phillip always claimed, the slightly faded family photos on the mantelpiece, the chipped mug I loved. But I moved through it differently. Or rather, I was moved through it. Phillip. He'd taken a leave from college talks, put his own burgeoning life on pause. His bedroom door, usually plastered with band posters and a keep out sign, was now perpetually open. He was the first one I saw in the morning and the last one at night. The initial days were a blur of excruciating physiotherapy, medication schedules, and the crushing weight of helplessness. Simple things became monumental tasks. Getting dressed, showering, reaching the damn cereal box on the top shelf. Phillip was there for all of it. His initial awkwardness, that teenage reluctance to deal with messy adult problems, evaporated, replaced by a quiet competence that was both astonishing and deeply unsettling. I remember the first time he had to help me bathe, the sheer naked vulnerability of it, not just physical but emotional. Here was my child, the boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose monsters I'd chased from under the bed, now tending to my broken body with a seriousness that felt years too old for him. He was meticulous, careful, his gaze focused on the task, never lingering, never making me feel exposed. But I was exposed, stripped bare, literally and figuratively. My chest would tighten with a confusing mix of gratitude and shame. Gratitude that he was there, that he hadn't run screaming like his father had, metaphorically speaking. Shame that he had to see me like this, that our roles had been so violently reversed. He'd help me into bed, adjusting pillows, making sure the remote and water were within reach. Sometimes his hand would brush mine as he passed me the glass, and a strange jolt, like unexpected static electricity, would pass between us. It was nothing, of course, just the proximity, the dependence. But it was a flicker, a tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness of my new existence. I'd lie awake long after his footsteps faded down the hall, listening to the house settle, feeling the phantom ache in limbs that weren't there, and grapple with the undeniable truth. My son-in-law was becoming the center of my universe in error, a way that felt fundamentally wrong, yet utterly unavoidable. The reliance was absolute, the emotional entanglement deepening with every shared silence, every necessary touch. It was the beginning of a path neither of us could have foreseen, paved with love, obligation, and a growing, terrifying intimacy. The days bled into weeks, then months. Routine settled over us like a thick, muffling blanket. It had its own rhythm, dictated by medication timings, therapy sessions conducted in our living room, now cluttered with resistance bands and balance balls, and the simple yet arduous logistics of my existence. Phillip was the conductor of this strange orchestra. He learned the precise pressure needed to massage the knots of phantom pain that clenched in my residual limbs, a sensation both agonizing and bizarrely real. His hands, once hesitant, became knowing, firm. He'd kneel before me, his brow furrowed in concentration, his touch steady. There were times, during those long evenings when the ache was particularly relentless, that his massage would continue, for what felt like hours. The room would be quiet, save for the sound of our breathing and the rhythmic pressure of his thumbs. In those moments, the lines blurred so easily. Was this a son-in-law caring for his mother-in-law? Or something else? The intimacy was undeniable, a physical closeness born of necessity that surpassed anything I'd ever known, even in my marriage. It was functional, medicinal, yet the air around us would sometimes grow thick, charged with an unspoken tension I couldn't name, didn't want to name. I'd focus on a spot on the wall, tracing the cracks in the plaster, anywhere but his face, anywhere but the confusing warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with muscle relief. He learned to cook surprisingly well. Our evenings shifted from takeout boxes consumed in near silence to shared tasks in the kitchen. Me, relegated to chopping vegetables at a lowered counter Phillip had rigged up. Him moving around the space with an easy grace, navigating the familiar territory of our home in a way I no longer could. We'd talk sometimes about his online courses, a compromise we'd reached instead of him deferring college entirely, about the neighbors, about nothing, really. But even the silences felt different now. They weren't empty. They were full, brimming with unspoken thoughts, with the weight of our shared confinement. He rarely went out with friends anymore. When I urged him to, told him he needed a life outside these walls, he'd just shrug, a familiar teenage gesture, but his eyes held something else, a sense of duty, obligation, or something deeper, something that mirrored the confusing dependency I felt towards him. He saw me at my lowest, my most undignified. He dealt with catheter bags, with medication side effects, with the tears of frustration that sometimes overwhelmed me in sudden, violent waves. He never flinched. He just handled it. His calm presence became my anchor, but also my cage. How could I ever regain independence when my dependence was so interwoven with this person-in-law who seemed increasingly content to be my everything? I found myself studying him sometimes, the way his dark hair fell over his forehead when he was concentrating, the dusting of freckles across his nose I hadn't paid much attention to since he was a kid, the set of his jaw when he helped me with the excruciatingly difficult transfer from wheelchair to bed. He was becoming a man right before my eyes, shaped by circumstances neither of us had chosen. And I was stuck. Not just in the chair, but in this strange emotional limbo. Memories of my old life would ambush me. Driving with the windows down, music blasting, hiking trips, feeling the burn in my legs, the sun on my face, dancing awkwardly but joyfully at a wedding. Simple things, things I'd taken utterly for granted. Now, the highlight of my day might be successfully navigating the hallway without bumping into the furniture, or Phillip bringing home the specific brand of dark chocolate I liked. The contrast was a physical ache, a constant reminder of the chasm between Martha before and Martha now. Phillip was the bridge between those two worlds, the only constant thread. But the bridge itself felt increasingly unstable, swaying under the weight of emotions that felt illicit, dangerous. A touch lingered too long. A shared gaze held a fraction of a second more than necessary. Innocent gestures, perhaps, born of familiarity and care. But they ignited tiny, alarming flares in the pit of my stomach, warnings I tried desperately to ignore. The world outside continued, oblivious. Inside our house, the air grew heavier, the boundaries softer, more porous. We were orbiting each other, trapped in a gravitational pull that felt both comforting and deeply, profoundly wrong. The house started to feel smaller, tighter. Not physically, of course, but emotionally. The air hummed with a low-frequency current, a constant awareness of Philip's presence that went beyond just knowing he was in the next room. It was in the way I'd pause before asking him for help, suddenly hyper-aware of the request's inherent intimacy. Could he zip up the back of my dress? A simple task, one he'd performed countless times now. Yet suddenly, the thought of his fingers brushing the skin of my back sent a ridiculous, unwanted heat creeping up my neck. I'd find myself holding my breath as he leaned close, his scent, clean laundry, soap, something uniquely Phillip, filling my senses. The casual brush of his arm against mine as we navigated a narrow space, the way his hand might rest momentarily on my shoulder for balance as he helped me transfer. These small points of contact became amplified, charged. Moments that should have been mundane, purely functional, crackled with unspoken significance. Or maybe I was just projecting my own internal chaos onto him? It was impossible to know. His face remained maddeningly composed most of the time, his focus absolute when assisting me. But sometimes I'd catch a flicker, a hesitation, before he met my eyes. A slight tightening around his mouth when our hands touched for longer than strictly necessary while passing a plate or a book. Was it annoyance, awkwardness, or a reflection of the same bewildering current I felt? We fell into a habit of watching movies together late at night, after his online coursework was done, after my final meds were taken, after the drawn-out ritual of getting me settled for the night was nearly complete. We'd sit on the couch, a respectable distance between us initially. But as the movie progressed, as the house grew darker and quieter outside the glow of the screen, the space would inevitably shrink. A shared blanket, his arm resting along, the back of the couch behind me. My wheelchair parked nearby like a silent, metallic chaperone. One night, watching some mindless action film, there was a scene, unexpectedly intense, emotional. I glanced over at Phillip, curious about his reaction, and found him already looking at me. Not at the screen, but directly at me. His expression was unreadable in the flickering light, but his gaze held an intensity that made my breath catch. It felt raw, vulnerable, and deeply confusing. We looked away at the same moment, a silent, mutual retreat. But the space between us suddenly felt electric, dangerous. The rest of the movie played out in a thick, uncomfortable silence, the sound of the actors' voices jarringly loud against the backdrop of our shared tension. The weather turned that week. A heavy, oppressive heat settled over the town, promising thunderstorms. The air in the house felt thick, difficult to breathe, mirroring the suffocating closeness I felt with Phillip. Each day felt like holding your breath, waiting for the inevitable break. The sky outside grew darker, bruised purple and gray. The wind picked up, rattling the windows, a physical manifestation of my internal turmoil. Guilt was a constant companion. Now. Guilt over my dependence, guilt over my simmering resentment of that dependence, and the most terrifying guilt of all, the guilt over the strange, unmother-in-lawly flickers of something I felt when Phillip was near. He was my son-in-law, my caregiver, my rock. He was sacrificing his youth for me. How could I possibly be feeling anything other than profound gratitude and maternal love? Yet, the way my skin prickled when he helped adjust my position, the way my heart hammered when he knelt before me, his face close to mine as he checked, the straps on my leg braces, these reactions felt treacherous, bordering on monstrous. I tried to push them down, smother-in-law them with practicality, with shame, but they persisted, unwelcome guests in the landscape of my already fractured mind. The storm was gathering, both outside and in. The pressure was building, becoming unbearable. Something had to give. The waiting was the worst part, the heavy stillness before the inevitable crash. The storm broke that night with a violence that rattled the very bones of the house. It wasn't just rain. It was a torrential onslaught, hitting the roof and windows, like handfuls of thrown gravel. The wind howled, a mournful, angry sound that seemed to seep through the walls. Branches scraped against the siding. And then, the thunder. Not distant rumbles, but sharp, cracking explosions directly overhead that vibrated through the floor, through the frame of my wheelchair. Each clap felt like a physical blow, punctuating the thick tension that had been simmering between Phillip and me for weeks. We were in the living room, the TV flickering with a news report about the storm, the volume barely audible over the din. Phillip had been checking the windows, securing the latches, his movements efficient, practical. But I saw the tightness in his shoulders, the way his gaze kept darting towards the shrieking darkness outside, then briefly, almost nervously, towards me. The lights flickered once, twice, threateningly. My heart leaped into my throat. Being trapped in the dark, immobile. It was one of my deepest fears post-accident. "Maybe light some candles?" I suggested, my voice thinner than I intended. He nodded, already moving towards the kitchen drawer where we kept the emergency stash. He returned with a couple of thick pillar candles, placing one on the coffee table, another on the mantelpiece. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows, transforming the familiar room into something alien, primal. It softened his features, blurring the lines that marked him as my son-in-law, highlighting the man he was becoming. Just as he lit the second candle, the house was plunged into absolute darkness. A collective gasp seemed to hang in the air. Mine, certainly, maybe his too. The roar of the storm felt instantly louder, more menacing, without the buffer of electricity and humming appliances. Silence descended between us, thick and heavy, broken only by the wind and rain and the frantic pounding of my own heart. Phillip stood near the mantelpiece, silhouetted against the wavering candlelight. I couldn't see his expression clearly, only the outline of him, still, watchful. "You okay?" His voice was low, closer than I expected. He must have moved towards me in the sudden dark. I swallowed, trying to project calm I didn't feel. "Fine, just startled." Another crash of thunder, closer this time, rattling the picture, frames on the wall. I flinched involuntarily. And then he was there, kneeling beside my chair, his hand finding mine in the darkness. His touch wasn't hesitant or merely functional this time. It was firm, possessive almost. A grounding point in the chaos. "It's just a storm, Mom," he murmured, his face very close to mine now. I could feel the warmth of his breath, smell the faint scent of rain on his clothes from when he'd checked the windows. "Mom," he called me Mom, but the way he looked at me in that flickering, uncertain light, it wasn't the look of a son-in-law, comforting his mother-in-law. It was something else, something raw, something mirrored in the terrifying chaos swirling inside my own chest. Time seemed to stretch, warp. The storm raged outside, a soundtrack to the maelstrom within. His thumb brushed slowly across my knuckles. My breath hitched. I should pull away. I should say something, break the spell, remind myself, of the lines we were about to obliterate. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was like watching something inevitable unfold, a collision course set months ago, finally reaching its impact point. He leaned closer, the space between us vanishing. His eyes searched mine, a silent question asked, a terrifying answer already given by my stillness, by my inability to look away. And then his lips were on mine. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, hungry, a release of all the pent-up tension, the unspoken feelings, the confusion, and the fear. It was lightning striking the dry tinder of our impossible situation. Shock, hot and sharp, lanced through me, followed by a wave of something terrifyingly like relief. Wrong. This was so fundamentally, irrevocably wrong. But as his hand came up to cup my face, his touch surprisingly sure in the darkness, another part of me, a part I hadn't known existed or had ruthlessly suppressed, responded with a frightening intensity. The storm outside roared. Inside, the foundations of my world crumbled. We pulled apart, the silence deafening beneath the receding roar of the storm outside. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock the gravity of the moment. Neither of us spoke. What could be said? His face, illuminated by the unsteady light, was a mask of conflicting emotions. Shock, confusion, something that might have been fear or maybe even regret. I probably looked the same. The air was thick with the unspoken, with the monumental weight of the boundary we had just obliterated. He stood up abruptly, his movements jerky, unnatural. He mumbled something about checking the fuse box, even though the power was clearly still out across the neighborhood, and retreated into the darkness of the hallway, leaving me alone with the flickering candles and the wreckage of our relationship, as it had been. I sat there frozen, my lips still tingling, the ghost of his touch lingering on my skin. The wrongness of it was a physical ache, sharp and deep. He was my son-in-law, my child. Yet, the kiss hadn't felt repulsive. That was the most terrifying part. It had felt inevitable. A culmination. A breaking point that had shattered the facade of our caregiver-patient, mother-in-law, son-in-law dynamic, revealing the tangled, messy, impossible feelings underneath. The power eventually flickered back on sometime before dawn, the sudden glare of the overhead lights feeling harsh, intrusive. The morning after was excruciating. We moved around each other like ghosts, occupying the same space but avoiding direct contact, avoiding eye contact. Breakfast was a silent affair, the clinking of cutlery unnaturally loud. Phillip made toast, burned it slightly. I pretended not to notice. He cleared the plates with mechanical efficiency. The easy familiarity we had developed over months of forced proximity was gone, replaced by a brittle, suffocating tension. Words felt inadequate, dangerous. How do you talk about something like that? How do you undo it? You can't. That kiss had been a detonation, and we were left navigating the fallout, the landscape of our lives forever altered. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful confession or recrimination. It was quieter than that, more insidious. A subtle shift in the energy between us, a shared glance that held too much meaning. A necessary touch during caregiving that now felt loaded, perilous. We didn't discuss it, not really, not in depth. There was a tacit agreement, a silent acknowledgement that we had crossed a line and there was no going back. But where did we go from here? That was 3 months ago. The storm passed, but the emotional turbulence remains. Life continues, on the surface. Phillip still helps me. We still share meals, watch movies. To the outside world, to the occasional neighbor who stops, to the physical therapist who visits twice a week, we are still just Martha and Phillip. Mother-in-law and son-in-law, bound by tragedy and necessity. But the air in our house remains charged. The boundaries, once irrevocably blurred, are now constantly negotiated in silence. The relationship is different, deeper, more complex, fraught with a terrifying intimacy that exists solely within these walls. It's a secret we carry, heavy and consuming. Sometimes I look at him, watch him reading or working on his courses, and the guilt washes over me, suffocating and cold. I see the 17-year-old boy who stepped up when his world fell apart. Other times, when his hand brushes mine, when he smiles a certain way, that confusing warmth spreads through me again, unwelcome but undeniable. We are trapped together, not just by my physical limitations, but by this impossible, unspeakable thing between us. Love, dependence, a trauma bond twisted into something unrecognizable. I don't know. I genuinely don't know what to call it. I just know it exists. I glance down at my left hand sometimes, at the simple, plain band that rests on my finger now. It wasn't from a public ceremony. There were no guests, no announcement, just a quiet decision, another secret layered onto the first, a symbol of something, a commitment forged in the crucible of our strange reality, hidden from the judgment of the outside world. It feels both like an anchor and a millstone. What would you have done in my situation? Faced with that level of dependence, that blurring of lines born from necessity and trauma? Is there a right way to navigate something so fundamentally complicated? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you want to hear more stories like this, more explorations of the messy, complicated realities of life and relationships, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out. Your support means more than you know. Thank you for listening.